So John, if you ask most self-funded health plan administrators and their broker consultants who owns the health plan claims data, administrative data, I think that most, if not all, will tell you they assume that the plans actually do. But over the last few years, we've seen a raft of litigation and arguments between self-funded plans and their service providers, mostly TPAs, challenging this basic assumption. So what's going on?
Well, so by way of background here, we have always assumed that the plan is contracting for services, including record keeping with TPAs and so on. This is kind of crucial to what they do and what their own understanding of their compliance, their ability to audit even themselves. So everybody has simply assumed I'm contracting for this service. I'm contracting to have this company do things that I need done. Therefore, I should own the data and the records. It hasn't, I've done a fair amount of research and it hasn't even been really challenged until recently. That's just been assumed. And that's really consistent with, kind of basic property principles. What's happened is really two things. One is starting up with some litigation having to do with the use of plan funds by some major ASOs. And the second thing is really the transparency rules and the possibility of monetizing the data there. So what I mean by the first is it turns out that some major insurance companies have been doing things with plan funds that the plans at least didn't expect. I'm not going to comment on whether or not they were allowed because that's an active legal issue, but they certainly weren't expecting that they would turn funds over to an ASO and those funds would be used to pay claims for another plan. This is called cross-plan offsetting, and it turns out that I don't know if it's common, but it certainly has happened often enough with some major organizations. And so there has been substantial litigation around that. Part of that litigation has turned into litigation around access to the data around plan fund usage. There's a case called Bricklayers out there, and there have been a couple other cases, but Bricklayers is kind of the big one right now, where the plan wanted to get access to fund usage information in order to find out, was this going on? And maybe they had in mind litigation about it, maybe they didn't, but in any case, the ASO wasn't willing to turn over the information and was recalcitrant about that. And so that's in current litigation, which is all around what kind of access is the plan entitled to? Is there some basis to withhold it? My view is this is plan funding. This is records of use of plan funding. It's not at all clear to me why the ASO gets to withhold. There's also a really strong theory under HIPAA that says, hey, the plan has responsibility for this information. Therefore, it's entitled to be able to get it. Certainly, the ASO doesn't have the right to withhold it. But as I say, that's active litigation. The other one, which I think is kind of poses more difficulty with other services providers, in addition to the TPAs, the ASOs, has really cropped up more recently, and I think shows up not in litigation so much as in new forms of NDA, data sharing agreements, that we've been seeing. And what we're seeing there is really, really limiting NDAs that limit the data that the ASO is willing to share in ways that don't work for the other services that services providers like Renalogic, but like a lot of others, really need to be able to provide. I don't want to wade into the technical details, but what I think that's about is asserting control to avoid having other services providers create, information services that would share the information, that would sell the information, make it available so that it can be provided to individuals, to plan members. This is something that's required under the transparency rules. Seems to me that that's not a great reason to try to not share information. But what we have found at Renalogic, as you know, is that really we've had success in going back when we've raised one of these, we've had success in going back and saying, hey, look, we don't want to monetize this. We're not trying to provide a transparency rules data source for money. We just need it to do what we do. And once we explain that, we've actually had pretty good success so far, getting data sharing to go forward on the basis that we need it. So that's a different but related issue. I can definitely see how some folks might look at one of these NDAs and say, this doesn't make sense for us, but I don't know where it's coming from. So, you know, it can take some work. It can take some negotiations and discussions and red lines to make it clear what's going on and break that log jam. But we've had success with that so far. So I think that's the two things we're seeing.
I appreciate that. So along those lines that we just spoke about, what can a self-funded plan or its broker consultants do about this? When a TPA or an ASO refuses to provide a health plan with its own data, or refuses to provide the designee of that health plan, like a solution provider, with the data, despite the authorization and direction, like, what's the recourse for a health plan? How can they fight back?
Well, really, what they need to do is assert their own authority kind of strongly in the first place. And that, if it needs to, should come in writing saying, hey, look, we need you to share this information with that services provider for these purposes, and make it very clear that this is what the plan wants done and it's for the benefit of the plan. It's not, you know, it's not monetizing the information. It's not auditing the ASO. It's to get this service accomplished. And then, you know, from the Renalogic side, what we can do is we can come in kind of under that direction and say, that's right, this is the data we need. It's very specific, and we're perfectly willing to say that this is why we want it. So if you kind of have a 1-2 punch of the plan on the one hand asserting its authority, which it does have, and on the other hand, Renalogic saying, you know, or any other services provider saying, hey, in connection with this, here's what we need, and here's how we're going to use it. That should turn the key if you have an ASO or other TPA that really does understand its legal status. If it needs to escalate to TPA legal, you know, we'll do that if we need to. It shouldn't have to, I don't think, but, you know, again, we'll do what we need to do. But I think once you clearly articulate the legal authorities here, you should have somebody at the ASO who gets it and doesn't want to get involved in possible litigation over what should be, frankly, an administrative matter that doesn't take a whole lot of work to do.
Great, thanks.
My pleasure.